So today we're going to talk a little bit about graphing your sine and cosine curves. So let's look, for example, and let's take this sine function and let's try to graph it. So to graph this sine function, we need to know our amplitude and we need to know our period, because this is going to shift our graph. Okay, so I want you to find, this is what we did yesterday, so I want you to find your amplitude and your period. Okay, so the amplitude is going to be the absolute value of 2, right? So it's just going to be a 2. And your period is going to be 2 pi over the absolute value of b, but the absolute b here in this case is just a 1. So your period is going to be 2 pi. So there's going to be no stretch, but there's, or vertical, horizontal, a horizontal stretch of any kind, because it's not going to stretch the period, but it is going to stretch your amplitude. So it's going to stretch vertically. Okay, so let's think about this. So these are not going to change. So it's going to be pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. And then you can do the negative side as well. So when we're 0, we're going to be at 0. Instead of being at 1, we're now going to be up at 2. So at pi over 2, we're going to be up at 2. Same thing down here. We're going to be at negative 2. At pi, we're going to go back to 0. At 3 pi over 2, we're going to be at negative 2. And then at 2 pi, we will be at 0 again. At 5 pi over 2, we'll be up back at a 2. So basically what this is doing is it's stretching the amplitude, and this continues to go in that direction. Okay? All right, I'll do this one for me. So f of x is going to be equal to 5 times cosine of 1/2 x. So we have to find the amplitude and we have to find the period. Okay, amplitude, absolute value of 5, which is just going to be at 5. The period is going to be 2 pi divided by the absolute value of 1/2. So that's 2 pi divided by 1/2, which is just going to be a 4 pi. So that means my values are going to stretch and also stretch. Okay. So what goes on the x-axis is going to stretch by a 4 pi. So basically I'm doubling it. So that would mean that at pi, 2 pi, and 3 pi, that's going to be my values. I'll put 5 up here and negative 5 down here. So cosine of 0 now is going to be, instead of 1, it's going to be a 5. Cosine of pi here, so it's going to be pi over 2. Okay, so this means that this is going to be a 0. Cosine of 2 pi, when I plug 2 pi in there, so that's actually just saying cosine of pi in there. So it's the same thing as a negative 1. Multiply that times 5, which gives you a negative 5. And then when you plug a 3 pi in there, so that's 3 pi over 2. So cosine of 3 pi over 2 is going to be a 0. Cosine of 4 pi, so 4 pi over 2, so that gives me a 2 pi, right? So it's going to be up here. So basically, there is your period of your graph. It's beautiful. Okay. Y'all do this one for me. Okay, so y'all take a minute and try to do those two for me. So here the amplitude is going to be the absolute value of negative 3/2, which is just going to be a 3/2. So that means that it's going to stretch, instead of being at a 1 and then a negative 1, it's going to be at a 3/2 and a negative 3/2. So that's in between 1 and 2. Okay. Period is going to be 2 pi divided by b, which is, or the absolute value of b. So this is going to be pi over 2. So that means this is going to shrink. Okay. So it's going to shrink. So let's draw this. Here's a 1 and here's a 2. Okay. So let's put in here a 0, a pi over a 2. Gotta stretch that out some more. Okay, so basically 1 period for your cosine curve is going to be through a pi over 2. Okay, so here we'll have cosine, but it's a negative, right? So cosine of 0 is going to be a negative 3/2, so it's going to be down here. Okay, so now I need to put in values that are in a period that can make this stretch a little bit. Okay, so what values are in between 0 and pi over 2? There's a lot of values that you could plug in. You could plug in all your pi over 3, you could plug in pi over 4, you could plug pi over 6 in, and so pi over 6 would just be what? 2 pi over 3, so 2 pi over 3 basically. So this is going to go up to a 0 here, up, down, and then pi. Up, up, down. So there is your cosine wave here. It's kind of crazy. All right, so let's look at this one. So we've got f times, or 4 times sine of 2x. So the amplitude is 4. And the period is going to be 2 pi divided by absolute value of 2. So your period is going to be pi. So this one's going to shrink. Okay. So inside here, so we'll be up to 4, and then we'll be down to 4. So sine of 0 is going to be up here. Oops, no, I'm sorry. Not sine. Is going to be at 0. Okay. And then we're going to be up, down, down, up. So 1 period there that goes through pi. Then we'll be up, down, down, up. So here is our sine wave. Okay. All right. Let's look at your tangent graph. Okay. So let's look at this tangent here. So tangent, you have some things that are undefined at tangent. So the parent function of tangent is going to be tan of x. Okay. So we're going to have asymptotes at tangent because we're undefined at some places. Okay, and we're undefined at those places of some pi over 2. Okay, so we are going to have asymptotes at some value. So each pi over 2, okay, plus an n pi. So as you increase, so we're going to have asymptotes at each one of these x values. where n is a integer. So that means the domain, we can't be in that, we can't have some pi over 2. So x can't be equal to pi over 2 plus that n pi, right? It can be everything else except for that. Okay? So basically this graph is going to be a little snake inside of here at each, because it's 0 at each one of these, right? Okay. The range of values is going to be negative infinity to infinity. It's going to cross the x-axis at each pi. It crosses the y-intercept at 0, 0. So this one, this period is going to be pi. Okay, right? Because it repeats, and there's going to be no amplitude. So we'll just call that undefined. Okay, so this is an odd function, so it's got origin symmetry. Okay. So to find the amplitude and or period of, it'll be different than your cosine and sine. So the amplitude of tangent So the amplitude, no matter what, amplitude is undefined. Okay, the period is going to be, instead of 2 pi divided by b, it's going to be pi divided by b, or the absolute value of b. Okay, so let's look at this graph here. So 4 times the tangent of x. The amplitude, undefined, right? Non-existent. The period is going to be pi divided by b, and in this case b is 1, right? So it's just going to be a pi. Good. So nothing's changing except for how maybe we stretch a little bit. So at pi over 2, we'll be at pi here, and 3 pi over 2, we'll have another one, right? So it's going to stretch a little bit, but there's no amplitude. Remember, amplitude is how maybe it goes through, it passes through those values, okay? So that's about how you would graph a tangent. You can check this by graphing it in your calculator. So I want you to now finish up your homework that you have. And if you have any questions, let me know. Y'all have a good day.